You set your potted tomato in a sunny spot. You gave it fresh soil. You watered every morning. I lost more potted tomatoes than I care to count before I figured out what was actually going wrong. And still, the leaves went yellow from the bottom. The edges turned brown and crispy, and the whole plant stalled out by July. That was not bad luck. That is what happens when advice written for garden beds gets applied to a plant living inside a pot. In this video, I am breaking down 5 container mistakes that keep killing potted tomatoes even when you do everything right. The last one involves the temperature inside a dark pot on a hot afternoon, and it may change where you put every tomato container for the rest of the summer. Mistake number 1. Drainage, the wet layer you never see. You drilled holes in the bottom of your pot. You even added a saucer underneath. So why are your tomato roots still rotting? You water your tomato one morning, watch the runoff flow into the saucer, and walk away thinking you did everything right. 3 days later, the lowest leaves turn yellow. You figure it needs more water, so you give it a deep soak 2 mornings in a row. By the end of the week, the bottom half of the plant is curling and soft, and every extra drop only sped the damage along. You overwatered it to death without knowing. Here is what nobody tells you about pots. Even with holes in the bottom, water never fully drains out. There is always a soaked layer sitting at the base of your soil that stays wet from one watering to the next. You cannot see it, but it is there every single time you water. The shorter the pot, the more space that layer takes up relative to the soil your plant has to work with. Your tomato roots are sitting in the middle of it, soaking, every day. So your pot has drainage holes, but that wet layer stays put no matter what. And the plant sitting in it has no say in the matter. If you added gravel to the bottom because someone online said it helps drainage, that actually pushed the soggy zone higher. Gravel does not pull moisture down any faster. It lifts that waterlogged layer up into the area where roots are actively growing, which is the exact opposite of what you want. That tip gets repeated everywhere, and it backfires every time. This is the detail that changed how I think about containers. Because I had been putting gravel in every pot for years and never once questioned it. So here is what to do instead. Lift your pot off the ground and set it on pot feet, a couple of bricks, or a small riser so you have 1 to 2 inches of clearance underneath. That lets air circulate beneath the drainage holes so water actually exits instead of pooling flat against the surface. Small lift, big difference. The first time I lifted a pot off the concrete and saw the difference in drainage, I could not believe I had skipped something that simple. If you use a saucer, come back 30 minutes after watering and pour it out. A pot sitting in collected water is the same as having no holes at all. Skip the gravel and fill the whole pot with a potting mix that has perlite in it, those white granules in the bag that keep everything loose and draining. Do not use dirt from your yard, because that creates a different problem entirely, and I'm getting into it next. If you grow in a self-watering container, turn off the reservoir during rainy weeks. Those pots hold moisture by design, and during a wet stretch, they will keep the bottom of your soil soaked around the clock. That soggy layer at the bottom is invisible, but your roots feel every bit of it. Mistake number 2. Soil. Same dirt, opposite outcome. Your garden soil grew amazing tomatoes last year, so you scooped some into a pot. That was the beginning of the end. You filled that 5-gallon bucket with dirt from your backyard because it felt wasteful to buy soil when there was a whole yard of it sitting right outside your door. Every container grower has done this at least once, and the logic makes perfect sense, right up until you see what that dirt actually does once it is locked inside a pot, out in the ground. Garden soil stays loose because the entire ecosystem around it is doing the work. Earthworms pull it apart. Roots from dozens of plants keep breaking it up, and water moves through it freely in every direction. No worms, no network of roots, no natural drainage. Take that same soil and trap it in a container, and all of that disappears. After 3 or 4 waterings, the dirt compresses into a heavy, airless mass. Water either pools on top and refuses to soak in, or it shoots down one side and out the bottom without ever reaching the roots. Your plant cannot push through it, and it cannot breathe. And every pathogen that stayed harmless in an open garden bed now has nowhere to spread in a small, sealed space. So it multiplies and takes over before you see a single symptom. What gets me about this one is how normal everything looks at the start. The soil looks dark, the plant puts on new growth, and then 2 weeks in, the whole thing collapses at once. So here is what to do instead. When you head to the store, look for a bag that says potting mix on the label. Not garden soil, not topsoil, and not raised bed mix, because those are entirely different products and none of them were designed for the inside of a pot. Potting mix is built specifically for containers because it stays light, drains freely, and holds just the right amount of moisture without cutting off the air your roots need. Pick up the bag. If it feels light for its size, good. If it feels heavy like a bag of sand, that is the wrong product. If you want to blend your own, the ratio is 60% peat moss or cocoa coir, 30% perlite, and 10% compost. That mix stays loose and breathable while still holding enough water to keep your tomato fed between waterings. You can find all 3 ingredients at any garden center for a few dollars each. If you are reusing last season's potting mix, stir in about 30% fresh perlite and a handful of compost to open it back up. Then spread the old mix inside a black trash bag, seal it, and set it in direct sun for 4 to 6 weeks. The heat takes care of whatever carried over. Skip that step, and you risk hauling last season's disease straight into this year's harvest. Miracle-Gro Potting Mix and Fox Farm Ocean Forest are 2 reliable options at Home Depot and Lowe's. And you do not need the most expensive bag on the shelf, just the right type. No matter how good your backyard dirt was in the ground, it does not belong in a container. That rule never changes. Same dirt, completely different outcome. The pot changes everything. Mistake number 3. Fertilizer. Caring more kills faster. Here is the cruel irony of container tomatoes. They need more food than ground tomatoes, but give them the same dose, and you will burn them alive. You noticed the leaf edges turning brown and crispy, so you gave it another round of fertilizer. Within a week, the whole plant wilted like it gave up. Here is what most people miss about feeding a container tomato. A 5-gallon pot holds less than 1 cubic foot of soil. That is it. Your in-ground tomato has access to hundreds of gallons of earth. Your potted one has maybe 4. Out in a garden bed, when you sprinkle a tablespoon of fertilizer around a plant, the roots fan out several feet in every direction, and all of that fertilizer gets diluted across a massive amount of ground. In a container, that same tablespoon is concentrated into a fraction of the space. The salts from the fertilizer build up with nowhere to go, and over time, they start pulling moisture out of the roots instead of letting it in. The roots dry out from the inside. That is what fertilizer burn actually means. Same spoon, same fertilizer, completely different math once the pot is involved. And here is the part that makes it dangerous. The symptoms look exactly like the plant needs more water. Leaves wilt, edges go brown and papery. The whole plant droops. It looks identical to a plant that went 3 days without a single drop of water. So you water more. Or worse, you give it another feeding thinking it is starving. In a garden bed, the soil absorbs that mistake over time because the volume is large enough to spread it out. In a pot, there is no room for error. Whatever you put in stays right where the roots sit. And every dose stacked on the last one drives the salt level higher. Once I understood the math behind this, I stopped guessing with container feeding and never looked back. So here is what to do instead. The rule for containers is simple. Half the dose, twice as often. If the label on your fertilizer says 1 tablespoon every 2 weeks, use half a tablespoon every week. Your plant still gets the same total amount of nutrition over time, but in smaller, steadier amounts that a small volume of soil can handle without accumulating damage. That is the whole trick. For pots under 10 gallons, use liquid fertilizer. Liquid is easier to measure precisely, and if you go slightly heavy one week, you can ease off the next. Granular fertilizer is harder to control in a small pot because once those pellets dissolve, you cannot take the salts back out. One heavy application in a 5-gallon container can set you back weeks. Once a month, flush the entire pot. Run about 3 times the normal volume of water straight through and let it drain completely out the bottom. You will see the runoff come out slightly cloudy or discolored. That is the built-up salt leaving. Think of it as clearing the slate so your next feeding starts clean. If your plant is wilting and the leaf edges are browning, but the soil still feels damp when you stick your finger in, stop feeding for 2 full weeks. Flush once, then watch. If the plant bounces back, the problem was too much fertilizer, not too little. Any liquid tomato or vegetable fertilizer works in containers. Mix it at half the strength printed on the bottle. That is the only adjustment you need to make. Your plant looks thirsty, but it is actually drowning in salt. That is the trap. If you are learning things about container growing that you have never heard before, subscribe. This channel shows you exactly what to do in a small space, so you stop guessing and start growing. Mistake number 4. Watering. The swing nobody warns about. Every watering guide for tomatoes was written for plants in the ground. Your pot plays by completely different rules. You watered every morning before work. Some mornings you forgot. By Friday, bone dry. Saturday, you soaked them. Monday, flowers dropped. In the ground. Roots spread out feet in every direction and reach deeper soil that holds moisture long after the surface dries. In a pot. The only water your plant has is what fits inside that container. And on a hot day, a 5-gallon pot on a sunny balcony can lose every drop of it in 24 hours. But drying out is only half the problem. The real damage comes from the swing. One day the soil is parched, the next it is drenched, and the plant gets yanked between 2 extremes with no time to steady itself. In the ground, that shift plays out over days. In a pot, it can happen between morning and night. And every time the plant goes through that cycle, it loses a little ground it never recovers. In the ground, the soil forgives a missed watering. In a pot, it remembers every one. If you have seen my video on June tomato mistakes, you know inconsistent watering is what causes blossom end rot. In a container, that inconsistency hits twice as fast. This was the toughest habit for me to unlearn, because years of watering a garden bed convinced me I already had it figured out. Here is what works. Check your pots every single day during summer. Push your finger about 2 inches into the soil. Dry at that depth means water now. Still damp means wait. A moisture meter from any garden center runs $8 to $12 if you want to take the guessing out entirely. When you water, water deep. Keep pouring until it flows out the drainage holes. Shallow sips only wet the top inch, while the roots at the bottom stay dry, and keep reaching for moisture that never arrives. Deep? Not often. Spread about 2 inches of mulch on the soil surface inside the pot. Straw, shredded leaves, or wood chips all work. That single layer cuts evaporation by 25 to 30%, which means the soil holds steady longer and the swings between dry and wet slow down. If you grow in fabric bags, they dry out 30 to 50% faster than plastic or ceramic. On a hot afternoon, you may need to water twice in one day. That is the trade-off for better root airflow. Just know it going in. If you tend to forget, a drip timer at any hardware store costs $15 to $25 and puts your watering on autopilot. The real rule is not about volume. It is about rhythm. Same amount, same time, every day, so the soil never crashes from one extreme to the other. It is not about more or less water. It is about never letting the swing go too far. And if watering sounds like the biggest challenge your container faces in summer, wait until you find out what the temperature inside your pot reaches on a hot afternoon. What size pot are you growing your tomatoes in? And what is it sitting on? Tell me in the comments. That detail matters more than you think. Mistake number 5? Heat. Your pot becomes an oven. This is the one I mentioned at the start. On a 95-degree afternoon, the soil inside a dark plastic pot on a concrete balcony can get hot enough to kill every root in it. You picked up that cute pot at the hardware store, the one on sale for $3. It looked perfect for the patio. 2 months later, the plant barely reached your knee and had 3 sad little fruits. Tomato roots do their best work between 65 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the range where they take in water, absorb nutrients, and actually grow. Once the soil temperature pushes past 95 degrees, the roots start shutting down. They stop feeding. They stop expanding. And if the heat keeps rising, they begin to die off entirely. A dark plastic pot soaks up heat from the sun all day long. If that pot is sitting directly on concrete, the slab is bouncing even more heat up into the bottom. And a small pot heats up faster than a large one because there is less soil inside to absorb and spread the energy. On a hot afternoon, the soil inside a 3-gallon black pot on a south-facing concrete surface can climb 20 to 40 degrees above the air temperature around it. That puts it well past the point where roots can survive. The pot is not just sitting in the sun. It is absorbing it, storing it, and pushing it straight into the roots. The worst part is that the symptoms look like everything else on this list. The plant droops in the afternoon even though you watered that morning. Leaves curl inward. Growth stalls out completely. You assume it is a watering problem, or maybe too much fertilizer. But the soil itself is so hot that the roots cannot do their job no matter what you give them. The first time I stuck a thermometer into the soil of a dark pot sitting in full sun, the number on the screen stopped me cold. That single reading changed how I pick every container. Start with size. Cherry tomatoes need at least a 5-gallon pot. Determinate bush types do best in 10 to 15 gallons. Indeterminate vines want 15 to 20 gallons at minimum. A bigger volume of soil holds a more stable temperature throughout the day because the mass itself resists rapid heating the way a small pot cannot. Once the size is right, the next step is cutting how much heat the pot takes in. Choose a light-colored container, white, cream, tan, or pale terracotta. Stay away from black, dark brown, and deep green. If you already own dark pots and do not want to replace them, wrap the outside with a strip of light fabric or a layer of reflective foil. That alone knocks the internal temperature down noticeably. Fabric grow bags release heat through their sides instead of trapping it the way hard plastic does. And the soil inside stays measurably cooler on a scorching day. They do dry out faster, which I covered in the last section, but for keeping roots from overheating, they are one of the best options available. If your pot is on the small side and repotting is not an option, try double potting. Place the smaller container inside a slightly larger one with a gap of air between the 2 walls. That gap works like insulation. The same idea behind a double-walled coffee mug. Block the heat, keep the roots. Get the pot off bare concrete or stone. Pot feet, a couple of bricks, a piece of scrap lumber, anything that creates space between the bottom of the pot and the hot surface below. Then add 2 inches of mulch on top of the soil to block direct sun from baking the surface. If your balcony or patio faces west, you are getting the harshest sun of the day, right when temperatures peak. Slide the pot into afternoon shade if you can manage it. Even shifting it a few feet makes a real difference. I went through 3 seasons of stunted plants before realizing the pot itself was the problem, not anything I was putting in it. And if your plant has stayed short all season, barely set any fruit, and wilts every afternoon despite steady watering and careful feeding, the issue might not be water or nutrients at all. It might be that the container itself has been slowly roasting the roots since the day you planted it. Your pot is not just holding soil. On a hot afternoon, it is cooking it. 5 mistakes. 2 groups. The first 2, wrong soil and too much fertilizer, are about what goes into the pot. You control those on day 1. The last 3, poor drainage, inconsistent watering, and a container that overheats, are about what happens around the pot. They affect the plant every single day, and most growers never think twice about them. Get both sides right, and your pot becomes a home, not a trap. You do not need a backyard. You do not need a raised bed or 1,000 square feet of garden space. A balcony, a patio, one good-sized pot with the right mix, a steady watering habit, and a little attention to heat and sunlight. That is enough to grow the same tomatoes that someone with a full yard is growing right now. Once you stop treating a pot like a small garden bed, everything changes. Watching a plant finally thrive in a container after years of getting it wrong is one of the most satisfying things in this hobby. If you are growing in containers and want more guides built specifically for small spaces, subscribe. New ones go up every week. Tell me in the comments what your biggest container growing frustration has been. I read every single one. And if you want to know the 5 June mistakes that kill tomatoes in any garden, ground, or container, that video is right here.